For some reason, this AM, I was drawn to look into national emergencies. So that's where I'm at. I was looking at the National Emergencies Act, enacted September 14th, 1976. 1776, 1976, 200 years. Interesting. The United States federal law passed to end all previous national emergencies and to formalize the emergency powers of the president. And there's the long title there. An act to terminate certain authorities with respect to national emergencies still in effect and to provide for orderly implementation and termination of future national emergencies. And that's interesting. It almost sounds like maybe somebody was abusing the power and then they had to enact this. Isn't that wonderful how they call it an act too? Like it's not real. It sure is interesting. Like a play, right? Signed into law by President Gerald Ford on September 14th, 1976. The act empowers the president. So here's what this 1976 law does. It empowers the president to activate Wonder Twin powers, special powers during a crisis, but imposes certain procedural formalities when invoking such powers. The perceived need for the law arose from the scope, so the reason for the law arose from the scope and number of laws granting special powers to the executive in times of national emergency. Yeah, basically too many laws granting special powers, huh? Congress can terminate an emergency declaration with a joint resolution enacted into law. Powers available under this act are limited to the 136 emergency powers Congress has defined by law. That would be interesting to see what the 136 emergency powers are. Here's the most interesting part. This is what I think. As of March 2020, 60 national emergencies have been declared, more than 30 of which remain in effect. That many national emergencies remain in effect, and then let's click on that. But down here says, as of March 2024, 84 emergencies have been declared. 40 have expired and another 42 are currently in effect. I think they need to update their other page on, each having been renewed annually by the president. What a bunch of baloney. So they just keep renewing it, president after president, kind of BS. So here is the list. The status all the way to the left, the president that enacted it, I guess, and then the date, the category, that's interesting, maritime, first one. Description, declared a national emergency arising from insufficient tonnage to carry the products of the farms, forests, mines, and manufacturing industries of the United States and admonishes all citizens to abide by the regulation in the Shipping Act. And I mean, every single one of these I could go through and research, but I mean, if you got the time, go for it. What else we got? This is an interesting one. Proclamation 2039. Declaring bank holiday. Declared a bank holiday from March 6th through March 9th, 1933 using Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. Never heard of it. As a legal basis. The first four emergencies cited by the Senate Report 93-549, 1973 as never having been terminated. Wow. Never having been terminated. Let's check that out. The Special Committee on the Termination of National Emergency, also known as Senate Report 93-549, was a document issued by the Special Committee on Termination of National Emergency of the 93rd Congress. Its purpose was to discuss and address the 40-year-long national emergency that had been in effect. Yeah, no kidding. You think you need to address a 40-year-long national emergency? That had been in effect since 1933. During the continued emergency, Congress voted to transfer powers from itself to the president. Wow. I don't know if the people would appreciate that all that much. The debate to end long-running national emergencies ended in 1976 with the National Emergencies Act, which rescinded the president's authority under prior emergencies. That's awesome. And established an expiration period subject to annual presidential renewal on future declared emergencies. Subject to annual presidential renewal. That's kind of garbage. I mean, I get why you could do that, but then again, I see why we need to wrangle this in and have a report of the special committee. Let's take a look at that front page. In responding to the Great Depression in World War II, let's get this. Roosevelt used declarations of emergency. His intent to broaden executive power. So his intent was to broaden executive power with the expectation that Congress, controlled by his own party, clever, would ratify his actions. Well, that just makes sense now, doesn't it? This pattern repeated under Harry Truman during the Korean War and became the backdrop of the Cold War, reflecting on the situation. The committee observed the 2,000-year-old problem of how a legislative body in a democratic republic may extend extraordinary powers for use by the executive during times of great crisis and dire emergency, but do so in ways assuring both that such necessary powers will be terminated immediately when the emergency has ended and that normal processes will be resumed, has not yet been resolved in this country. Too few are aware of the existence of emergency powers and their extent, and the problem has never been squarely faced. Wow, what a quote. The committee's investigation found that while some declared emergencies had been explicitly terminated, others had not. These were. Let's take a look at the ones that had not. Roosevelt's 1933 declaration under the Trading with the Enemy Act, which he used to block gold and silver transactions. Wow. That would be worth looking into. Truman's 1950 declaration in relation to the Korean War. Richard Nixon's 1970 declaration in response to a postal strike. It'd be fun to see what's hidden in that information. Nixon's further 1971 declaration in connection with floating the dollar. I don't really know what that means. Then again, I wasn't born yet. Maybe you were? Maybe you know what that means? I would have to do the research on it. Yeah, see, aside from these particular examples, the committee noted a trend since Roosevelt for transferring broad authority to the president in times of crisis and leaving it in place. And here's the important part. The practical effect was to enable the president as much as Congress to make laws. And that's no good. That's not what the president's there for. The committee found that these long-standing grants of authority were not merely theoretical, but that the executive agencies actively use them to justify various programs such as the FBI's domestic surveillance program. The report recommended that Congress should act to terminate the standing emergencies and to regulate the president's use of emergency authority. That's nice. That's nice. Some good guys out there, too, wrangling people in a little bit. But, Trump just signed a bunch of EOs, apparently, orders for the executive. But people just think they're like, I don't know. The way they present it, it's like, I think that people perceive it as it's becoming a law or he's just making a law. Seems like a dictatorship when you look at it from that point of view, actually, and people seem to be okay with it. Just because it's going, he's doing things that they want him to do. That's not really cool, man. Anyway, I just felt drawn to this. That's just kind of going down a rabbit hole here, Let's see which ones are still going on. Current Executive Order, November 14th, 1979, blocking Iranian government property. Interesting. Ordering the freezing of Iranian assets as part of the U.S. response during the Iran hostage crisis. Going on since 1979. Way to go, government. Still haven't resolved any of that yet. Would you say that they're doing their job or not doing their job based upon the fact that they still have to have these emergency situations in place? Seems kind of crazy to me. 1979. We're coming up on 29. It's like 50-year anniversary coming up. Come on, guys. We haven't got anybody in there doing a darn thing good, do we? And maybe the people wrangling these guys in a little bit, like the people who on that committee, maybe a couple of those guys. Let's see, current proliferation of weapons of mass destruction really provides for control over the export of weapons, combined to previous national emergencies regarding WMDs. Definitely worth looking into that one. Oh man, sanctions intended to prevent a business deal between Iran and Conoco. I don't know what that place is, but do you think that's okay for a third party to prevent two other people from doing business? Wow, kind of crazy sounding. Blocking assets and prohibiting transactions. Drug cartels, laundering money, declaration of national emergency, and invocation of emergency authority relating to the regulation of the anchorage and movement of vessels. That's interesting. Implemented following the destruction of 2 civilian aircraft by the Cuban military in '96. Wow. The next one, blocking Sudanese government property and prohibiting transactions with Sudan. You know, if the whole rest of the world thinks that the United States is bullies, I mean, this isn't helping us out. Blocking Sudanese government. So we're blocking somebody else's government property and prohibiting transactions with that government. Established a trade embargo against Sudan, specifically targeting the Sudanese government. Well, when you target somebody's government, doesn't that also affect the people? So wouldn't you kind of be targeting the people too? I wonder. Back down. Blocking property of persons who threaten international stabilization efforts in the Western Balkans. Dude, this is the craziest stuff. Like, we're just in everybody's business, aren't we? Intended to combat extremist Albanian insurgents operating in North Macedonia and limit obstruction of the Dayton Accords. I don't know what that is. Accords that they're having in Dayton? Amended on May 28, 2003 by Executive Order 13304 following the Ohrid Agreement signed in 2001. So... Oh, executive order. Oh, okay. So these are the executive orders. They are making these executive orders. Let's see. They just start calling them that? Yeah. Back in the day, it was a proclamation. And then we went to executive orders in 1979. I wonder if they had to change the wording on it to get around the paperwork. Interesting. Anyway, here we go. September 14th, 2001. Declaration of national emergency by reason of certain terrorist attacks. The first 2 national emergencies declared following the September 11 attacks, allowing the president to call troops from the National Guard or from retirement. Can you imagine that, getting called from retirement? To apportion military funding, to exercise more discretion over hiring military officers, and to promote more generals than previously allowed. To exercise more discretion over hiring military officers. I wonder what that really means. That's kind of gray. Like, well, let's get the guys we really want in there. The guys who really wants in there. The good guy, the bad guy. Okay. Another one, blocking property and prohibiting transactions, persons who commit, threaten, or commit or support terrorism. I mean, this is pretty broad here, isn't it? Yeah, cornerstone sanctions and fighting terrorism worldwide. To include the Taliban. To integrate the newly created position of Secretary of Homeland Security. 2001. And we're going on to 2003. Protecting the Development Fund for Iraq. Wow, protecting the Development Fund for Iraq and certain other property in which Iraq has interest. Wow, read into that whatever you want. That's what they named it. Granted the Development Fund for Iraq. Established the same-day legal protection in the wake of the invasion of Iraq and amidst the war in Iraq. All planned out. Same day. Blocking property of certain persons and prohibiting the export of certain goods to Syria. Here we are in 2004. Still effing us up. Effing us up, kid. Still current, blocking property of certain persons, undermining democratic processes or institutions in Belarus. Here we care about Belarus. And following similar sanctions by the European Union. Yeah, okay. Impose sanctions, including a travel ban on Alexander Lukashenko after Belarus's crackdown on peaceful protests against the recent presidential election, and following similar sanctions on the European Union. Blocking property of certain persons. So we're effing with the Congo. You know, we're gonna screw with them. Lebanon. People undermining the sovereignty of Lebanon. What about people undermining the sovereignty of the people in the United States? The United States removed North Korea from its list of state sponsors of terrorism, and as North Korea publicly declared its nuclear program. 2008. Still current. Here we are, blocking property of certain persons contributing to the conflict in Somalia. Blocking property and prohibiting certain transactions related to Libya. Blocking property of transnational criminal organizations. Blocking property of persons threatening the peace, security, stability of Yemen. Blocking property of the government of the Russian Federation. Did one of those. Here we go, 2014, blocking property of certain persons contributing to the situation in Ukraine, and that is 2014. They're talking about the situation in Ukraine, blocking property. Against Russia. Impose sanctions, including restricting visas in concert with the European Union and the international community against Russia after its annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. South Sudan, blocking property of people contributing to the conflict in the Central African Republic. Man, just blocking property, blocking property, blocking property, imposing sanctions, blocking property. I'm sure there's a lot more to it when you read.